18 months since it's been here. It's been 14 months since doctors knew that early treatments worked, since epidemiologists knew that lockdowns didn't work, and heck, it's been decades since doctors and everybody knew that masks are irrelevant for a tiny respiratory virus. So let's just dispense with the scientific facts. The first and most importantly is that there are 3 lies upon which the whole premise of a so-called public health emergency rests. Not that any one of these 3 lies and the con of there being a public health emergency evaporates. The first lie is the infectiousness itself of the virus and the disease. There were 2 faulty assumptions that were sold to you. One was that the germ was the most important variable in this pandemic. It's not true. It's individual susceptibility. Now, they knew this very, very early. I was watching all of this from very early. I'm a lawyer as well. I'm super interested in policy matters. So I was paying attention since the very beginning. And I noticed from the very beginning, before it came to America, kids were not getting sick. That told me immediately that it had something to do with a person's individual susceptibility. There are diseases that affect humans equally. This was clearly not one of them since the very, very beginning. Okay? Since observing that, we have absolutely proven it. And I'll get to some statistics later. But taken into account, it's not the germ that's the main variable, it's the individual susceptibility. And if you had been told that by people who knew that, you never would have let your kids be locked down. You never would have done 6 feet social distancing. You never would have done masks. So the lie was there since the very beginning. The second big lie they told you was the lie of asymptomatic transmission. They're trying to tell you that healthy people living their lives were posing a mortal danger to you. This was, I knew at the moment this happened that this was the greatest way to divide people. You can't really organize any resistance to anything if you can't go near anybody. So how quickly did we know that this was a lie? Studies started coming out pretty early, certainly by the spring, definitely by the summer. There were lots and lots of studies to show that this thing of asymptomatic transmission didn't actually exist. Mind you, this is a very clever lie because it's hard to disprove a negative. So it's quite difficult to structure those kinds of studies. But we had the data by the spring and certainly by the summer. Now, a few months ago, I don't remember exactly what it was, you know that large study in Wuhan, China that they published? 10 million people. Have you ever heard of a study of 10 million people? They took 10 million people who were PCR tested positive. We'll get to the testing. But those are people that were positive, and they said how many of those people who were asymptomatic but positive transmitted the virus causing clinical disease in somebody else. Out of 10 million positive asymptomatic, exactly 0 became sick that they transmitted. And the myth of asymptomatic transmission is exactly that. It goes right up there with Bigfoot. Doesn't exist. Okay? So the first lie that this public health emergency is resting on is the infectiousness. It's not that it's just not the way the infection has been sold to you. The main variable is not the germ, and it's not an asymptomatic thing. The second big lie was the testing. They've known, forever, that PCR testing is not the way to make the diagnosis, and they've certainly always known since the beginning that the amount of times they're cycling this PCR test is excessive to check what they say they're checking for. It's universally acknowledged by people that have vested interest essentially in not telling us the truth. Even those people have told us that over 35 is only capturing dead viral fragments. Fauci has said that. The CDC said even lower than that. Everybody agrees that over 35, you're just capturing dead viral particles. So would you like to know all the testing that you're hearing about, all the cases that you're hearing about? What numbers are they using? You would think, well, for sure they're not using over 35, right? Naturally. In other words, everyone agrees. The New York Times did a big article on this saying that 97% of testing results are wrong. Why? Quest and LabCorp are the 2 biggest commercial labs in our country. Quest uses a cycle threshold of 40, and LabCorp uses a cycle threshold of 38. Most Department of Health use cycle thresholds between 40 and 45. Right? We all agree that over 35 is inaccurate, probably to the tune of 97%. That's why when Dr. Reed was saying, well, these are the numbers, and we know the numbers aren't accurate, cut them by half, and then cut them by 95%. That's what he's talking about. The testing itself, even for people who genuinely have it, the testing, there's some people in that group that have it, but it could be as wrong as 97%. This doesn't exist in medicine. This never existed before 2020 to use such kind of faulty data testing. So the second lie was the testing. The third lie is death count. It's a lie in the concept and it's a lie in the specifics. Conceptually, have we ever kept a running death count in our country? What does it even mean if you get a headline that says 15,000 people are dead, 4,000 people are dead, 100,000 people are dead? I don't know. How many people die every day or every year in America? I'll give you like a Ferrari if you can tell me. Like, we don't track this. This isn't a thing. I mean, if they said 3 people died, maybe that's a lot. I mean, in other words, conceptually, it was like a disinformation campaign or a misinformation campaign to have you even focus on this. Now, there's also specific flaws in the death count. There's a misattribution of the cause of death. In these specific ways, these were rule changes, law changes brought to you by your federal government. 1, anybody who had a positive PCR test within 28 days of death from any cause was considered a COVID death. And when I say any cause, I mean any cause that was clearly unrelated also counted. You had a car accident, you had a PCR test 3.5 weeks before, that was a COVID death. Another way, if the doctor had a mere suspicion that it was COVID, it was written down as a COVID death. I'm a board-certified emergency doctor. I've had to sign many death certificates. You're very, very careful. There's very serious legal implications for signing a death certificate if you do it wrong. I'll give you an example. When a person comes into the ER, they have chest pain. They look like they're having a heart attack, they're sweaty, they're clutching their chest, and they say, I've got chest pain. Things don't go well, and they die. Dr. Gold, please sign the death certificate. They give me the death certificate. I don't write heart attack on the death certificate. I don't know. What I know is he had chest pain. I know he kind of looked like he was having a heart attack, but I don't know if he had coronary artery disease. I don't have his old records. I don't know. If I don't know, I don't write it. And all doctors did the same because we understand that this is an important thing. The family relies on it. Life insurance might rely on it. There's all kinds of implications. Nope. This year, it could be mere suspicion, or you had a positive blood test, or no swab 3 weeks ago with no symptoms. That's the law. That's the rule. Another way they changed it is they actually changed the way death certificates would be written. Death certificates have a part 1 and they have a part 2. Always, at least for 17 years, I don't know before that, part 1 would have the comorbid conditions a person had. Why? Because that's really ultimately why someone dies. If you're a dialysis patient, a cold, or an emphysema patient, a cold could knock you out. If you're a young, healthy person, a cold is not going to knock you out. So if you are a dialysis patient, or an emphysema patient, or a severe heart patient, and you get a cold and it has swelling, things go on, it develops to pneumonia, and then you die, we don't write cold on the chart, right? We don't write coronavirus on the chart, right? We write the renal failure, we write the emphysema, and underneath in part 2, you write the coronavirus is the reason, right? Yep, that was flipped for COVID, flipped. COVID-19 now became part 1, and the comorbidities were demoted to part 2. Unbelievable. There's an American's Frontline Doctors, an amazing guy. His name is Dr. Scott Jensen from Minnesota. So he actually won the Family Practitioner of the Year in Minnesota. And that's quite an honor, right? Your whole state saying you're the best family doctor in the country. That's amazing. He's like a Marcus Welby type. He's amazing. So he then ran for state senator. He's been a state senator for a number of years. Beloved, kind of amazing human being. So he started noticing his death certificate, fiasco, and he spoke up. He's a state senator, he's a, very prestigious guy. He spoke up and said, that we're doing this, it's not right the way we're doing it. So of course they had to listen to him and take him seriously. And they had to reverse some of what they were doing on the local Minnesota level. A month later, he gets a letter from the Minnesota State Medical Board questioning his license. Okay? I share this with you because you have to understand you're next. You say it's uncomfortable to stand up, it's uncomfortable to fight. You have an opportunity still to fight. Slim amount of time, but we still have it. Now, there are 3 facts about the virus. First is that it's not lethal to most people. Per the CDC, the chance of surviving, as Dr. Reed was writing, with if you're under 20 and no treatment at all, is 99.997%. You'd be thrilled if your son came home with a score of that on a test. You'd call that 100, right? That's 100% survival. So age 20, if the people telling the truth, I'd like to be precise. It's just the other side that doesn't want to be precise. These numbers are by the CDC, right? Not known for their truth. So this is the worst they could make it. Age 20 to 50, 99.98%. Again, that's 100%. Age 50 to 70, 99.5%. Most teachers would round that to 100. That's with no early treatment or treatment at all. Over age 70, it's almost 95%, and again, it goes to almost 100% with early treatment. This is the thing that they're telling you should give up all of your freedom for. Okay? These are numbers per the CDC. The second major fact, in other words, this isn't the virus to give up all of your constitutional freedoms. There could be a situation, for me no, because I'm a strict constitutionalist and I don't think our rights can be taken away by the government. But if there was a medical situation where you might consider restricting your rights, this would not be it. Number 2, early treatment works. There are now close to 300 published studies that show that early treatment works. This is not anecdotal. I've seen it work. I've given it to patients. They're trying to tell me that I haven't seen what I've seen. Okay? There's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of doctors across the world who've seen it with their own eyes, who will attest to it, who are on fire like I am. You might wonder, why is the doctor on fire? Well, you don't get on fire unless what you're seeing is not what is being told, and it's been told to be a lie. You don't get this kind of passion otherwise. So we've seen it. In addition to seeing it, you've had doctors and scientists write papers on the subject. They go through all the data, painstaking, they do it, and they get published. And let me tell you, this the fraud that we've seen, to get published on these studies is almost impossible. So if there's 300 published studies, there should be 30,000. So it's not anecdotal, it absolutely works. Number 3, we've been practicing medicine, public health upside down this past year. There's classic public health teaching. There are textbooks of public health. And you might look at those textbooks and say, well, how have we acted in the past with public health emergencies? One of the things that's gone wrong is we've acted like 2020 is a brand new phenomenon that didn't have thousands of years of history before it. It's not true. There have been 3 respiratory pandemics in the last 25 years from China alone. Okay, public health existed as an issue prior to 2020. What do public health textbooks say? 1, quarantining the healthy is irrelevant. It's also unconstitutional and illegal, but it's also irrelevant. Respiratory viruses, tiny respiratory viruses, cannot be fully contained by quarantining people, quarantining healthy people. It says this in public health textbooks. Number 2, early treatment is important and the way to go. That's not in dispute. Number 3, you protect the frail. We did none of those things, and the governors need to hang. I'm not going to hold my breath. And number 4, natural immunity is the best way to get to herd immunity. You can also supplement that with vaccination. I also say, as Dr. Farella does, I had no particular dog in the fight in terms of vaccinations. I've been vaccinated fully, my children have been vaccinated, but vaccination is a tool to increase us getting to herd immunity to protect the frail. That's what it's for. Natural immunity is actually the best. We know that it's lifelong, lasting. People here, some are old enough to remember chickenpox parties, measles parties, right? They're saying to you that that's not as good as an experimental shot. Be forewarned, that's the first time this has been said like that. We never used to say that. It's a lie. 3 facts about the vaccine candidates, because that's what we're all super interested in, right? All of the vaccine candidates have problems, and it's because they're all using related to the spike protein. There are other ways they could have developed these attempted vaccines, but they chose really, I think, the cheapest, easiest way to do it. Why do I say that? I'm not a bench scientist. I said that based on things they're saying. The CEO of Moderna has said so proudly in that YouTube video that it took him 2 days to develop the idea of how he's going to make the vaccine. I'm like, dude, go back and take a little longer. Because they're all using the spike protein. But it turns out the spike protein is not good for you, right? It's spiky. And when it's spiky, they all tend to clump together. So it clumps on the endothelial cells, the vascular cells, the lung cells. It crosses the blood-brain barrier. That's a whole other discussion. An item that crosses the blood-brain barrier, you have to pause when you hear that. Blood-brain barrier is like saran wrap, right? That doesn't let anything in. All the things that go into our body, in our mouth, inhaling, right? Don't get to our brain unless very, very rarely. Why? You've got this blood-brain barrier like saran wrap. It's church and state. We don't go there. We don't go there. Think of a woman in labor who's going to get the epidural, right? That's violating the blood-brain barrier. Think of the precautions people took. Like, we're going to gown up, we're going to mask up, we're going to put a thing on, you know, it's like very sterile. Like, that's because we really respect the blood-brain barrier. We don't put anything there. The spike proteins press the blood-brain barrier. I about had a heart attack when I learned that. Okay? So, you just need to know that. The spike, so when people say, should I take this one or that one, if you had to take one, I'm like, you can't take, in my opinion, you can't take any because they all use the spike protein. I am waiting for the one. I don't think anyone young needs to take this, but if I was going to take it, I'll wait for the one that doesn't use the spike protein. Now, they want to say that that makes me like an anti-vax position. That's insane, and that's not what I'm saying. I just want you to know it's a spike protein that's the problem. Now, other problems that we've noticed this year, and this is the lawyer part of me, is that there's widespread lack of informed consent. If you know people who've had the vaccine, they walk into the drugstore,